Hello and welcome to Corn Free Live. Glad you could all join us today. Now, today we're going to be talking about influence. So just think about this for a minute. 2 decades ago, we're exposed to around 3,000 messages a day. Today, it's close to 10,000. So influence is absolutely everywhere. And here's the interesting thing about influence. We tend to think of it as something we do, something deliberate, a message, a conversation, a moment when we're trying to bring someone with us. But what if we're influencing people just as much when we're not trying? Every time a leader speaks or doesn't speak, people are forming an impression. And today there are more people watching, more places to shop, and more ways for a message to travel than ever before. So how do you get influence right? And what happens when you don't? That's what we're getting into today. And as always, I need you to get involved. Drop your questions and comments into the chat. We'd love to hear what you think. Right, let's get started. As always, I'm your host, Darren Bolton. And joining me today are Tamara Rodman and Flo Fillet, two of Corn Frey's smartest voices on this topic. Great to have you here, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Darren.
We're no messing today. I want to get straight into it. So, Tamara, let's start with you. Influencing people has never exactly been easy, but it does feel like the rules have changed a little. You can say something with the very best intentions, think you've judged it perfectly, and somehow it lands completely differently from what you expected. So what's kind of changed? Why does getting influence right feel so much harder today, I guess?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't just feel harder. It legitimately is, right? And there's a couple of factors at play. So there's the fact that there's so many more voices out today that are actually having influence than there ever were before, kind of that democratization of information communication. There are so many more channels and forums and ways to connect with people. So there's a lot of noise, right? And so if you as a company or a leader are trying to influence or a decision that people, whoever that stakeholder group might be, whether it's customers or investors or employees, or trying to communicate a message, there's a very good chance it will get lost, overshadowed, or misunderstood within this sort of mass of information overload.
Yeah, great. Flo, anything you want to add to that at all?
I think Tamara's points actually resonate. The one piece I'll add to it is everyone actually now has the tools to communicate. So volume in terms of communication stops being an advantage. Right, with AI tools, with different channels that Tamara mentioned, we all can be everywhere. I think the key players really who are leading and being influential are those who lean into credibility, relevance, and trust. And of course, we'll unpack that in more detail. But I just want to add, those are some of the key points to note as we think about influence.
Great. And Flo, there's a kind of assumption that if we communicate more, show up more, just generally put more effort into getting our message out there, then surely we become more influential. But is it really that simple? Because once something leaves your mouth or leaves the building, what happens next isn't necessarily up to you, is it?
Absolutely. You bring up a good point because we're seeing this with a lot of clients as well. Leaders who struggle with translating their vision, their strategy into action. And so one thing that we do and that I do with a good number of my clients is helping them ask and answer 3 distinct questions. What do you want to say? Right, will be the natural leaning that most leaders think about. But I challenge them to think about how do you want the other person to experience what you're saying, right? We know from experts who've talked through, information transfer, it's very important to think about perspective before you move to persuasion. Many leaders start with persuading, want to influence, want to change behavior, but you've got to frame it from a point of view, from a perspective lens before you get into persuasion. The last thing I'll add on this point, though, is that for leaders, I think it's important that they think about the diversity of the audience, the numerous different stakeholder groups. And you have to be intentional about the same message you send out might be interpreted differently. And so how do you massage and manage that divergence as it begins to bubble up to the surface? So those are just some of the things I think are important here as leaders think about influence.
I love that, Flo. I love the perspective before you go to persuasion. Love that. And I would just add, I think too, Darren, to your question, should we just be doing more and communicating more? Absolutely not. I mean, there's this is a situation where quantity matters so much more, or quality matters so much more than quantity, right?
That's right.
If you just simply hearing from someone, repeatedly, and they're being very loud, in an environment that's quite loud, it's actually to your detriment as the person trying to communicate a message. Eventually, people will just tune you out. So, got to be really targeted and really specific and memorable in what you say and what you want people to walk away with.
Yeah. Perfect. Don't forget, everyone out there, to get your questions in as soon as you can. As I say, every time we do these, we get loads of questions coming about 5-10 minutes after we've finished. And then I can't put that to our lovely guests. So please put them in as quickly as you can, and I'll put them to our guests. But I just want to actually bring the viewers into this a little bit. We've got a poll for you, and that might get people warmed up. They love a poll. There you go. It's appeared on screen. Lovely. Thank you. Oh, switch. Like it. So the question is, what makes a leadership message really land with you? Is it because it feels genuine? Is it when it's clear and easy to understand? Maybe it's about relevance, maybe it actually means something to you and your role. Or is it simply about timing, right message, right moment, that kind of stuff? So have a look at the options, make your choice. Don't overthink it, just go with your guts. There's no right or wrong answers. And hopefully, if I remember this time, because I forgot last time, we'll come back to the results in a minute and have a little discussion about it. But please get those in the chat, your numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll have a look at those a little bit later. Right, back to our wonderful guests. Tamara, there was an example, you kind of touched on this a little bit, example I saw in Briefings magazine recently that kind of really grabbed me, almost shocked me, I guess. It was a bank CEO talking about AI and the idea of replacing what he described as lower value human capital. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh my goodness me, was that meant to get out? Whatever the intention behind it, if I'm an employee hearing those words, I'm immediately thinking, what does that mean for me? Am I lower value? And I think that's such an interesting example of just how kind of difficult this can be, because you might have a message you want to deliver to a particular audience, but for a particular reason, but plenty of other people are listening to, a bit like we touched on a few seconds ago. So, Tamara, where do leaders most often misjudge this? Is it the message, the moment, the audience, possibly all three, I guess?
Yes. Well, I think it is a combination of the three. I'll give you, let me use a metaphor it kind of helps how I think about the communication landscape these days. It used to be that influence was somewhat like having a conversation in different rooms of a house that were separated, right? So, you could have a closed door discussion in the study or the office, or, what happens or is said in the kitchen stays in the kitchen, right? And it was harder to travel, like, if you had customers in one room and investors in another. Today, really, I think about when you're communicating, it's in a ballroom, right? There are no walls. You might be speaking to a specific group, if it's investors or your top customers or whatnot, or even employees in a town hall, but you don't know who's lurking in the, might be at the next table over, or it may be at the periphery of the room, who maybe even has their phone out and is recording a live video of what you're saying. So it's so important still to make sure that you're targeting and tailoring your message to your core stakeholder group, but you got to do it in a way that's, acknowledging that this is not the only stakeholder group or audience that's going to hear it. Otherwise, yes, low value human capital is nobody wants to be described that way, and that just makes me cringe as well thinking about that.
Sorry, Flo, were you going to say something?
No, I'm with you, Tamara, on that phrase. I think actually that's a misspeak on anyone's part who uses that word. But to add to your point, though, I think there's another layer I'd like to maybe just bring up, which is sometimes leaders assume that when a message doesn't land, that is a pure communication problem. Oftentimes, people get the message, they just don't trust the premise of the messenger. And I think that's something that leaders cannot, or even anyone who actually is communicating, cannot overstate or underestimate, is there congruency between what you're saying and what you're doing, and also how you're saying what you're saying, right? So it is about making sure the message is not just right, but it's true to you as an individual who is sharing that information. I'll give an example. There was an example of a leadership team that kept saying, we want you to experiment, we want you to take risks, we want you to innovate. And then the very first person who decides to take a risk gets penalized.
Yeah.
Right. So while the message is heard loud and clear, the interpretation of the action behind the message is actually misaligned with the core message. So I just want to call out that sometimes leadership should think through the entire ecosystem of their communication and what they're saying, beyond just I've said something and I expect people to follow what I've stated.
Actions do still speak louder than words, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. But is that holding leaders back from saying anything? Because it's kind of like, oh my God, this is a minefield. Does it lead to generic announcements or generic thoughts rather than thinking, if I say that, they might take it like this, and if I say that, they might take it like that? It does feel like a little bit of a mind. Not saying that the CEO before was right, but it does feel like a little bit of a minefield.
Yeah.
I think we've got a good question coming up. So is there a question from our lovely Kathy? Right, so the question is, what's more damaging, saying the wrong thing or saying nothing at all? Okay. That's perfect timing, Kathy. Well done. Who wants to take that one on?
I'll give it a crack, and Flo would love for your thoughts as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know that this is a neat can be answered in a binary way, because you could probably make an argument and give examples for both being really catastrophic potentially. Yeah. I think, saying the wrong thing, it really depends on, I think, the why and the motive. Saying something but coming back and being like, you know what, taking accountability for this was, thoughtless, slip of the tongue, unintentional. That's one thing. But saying nothing at all is actually saying something. And this is something that we talk about with clients all the time is staying silent is a choice. And people are going to read into that and frankly, fill the void with speculation. So I would actually argue that can be just as damaging, especially when it comes to things like transformation or major decisions or moves that are going to be happening within a business. People will start to come up with their own answers to those questions that they have. And if leaders aren't out there owning the narrative, so to speak, to use a cliche, it's going to get away from you really quickly.
Oh boy, this is actually, I've been thinking about this question quite a bit as well as you were speaking, Tamara. I can't decide on which one is worse, to be honest with you. And here's my challenge. My challenge is one, in the absence of nothing, because we know nature abhors vacuum, something will get filled and something will get stated. And I think with AI is significantly worse now because the scale of misinformation can actually be catastrophic. And so I almost lean towards, it's okay for the leader to perhaps lean towards saying something. Hopefully you have the support and the system that allow you to be able to frame the right thing the right way. But it's better to at least fill the space, even if it's with information that is TBD, in progress, right? So again, part of what we love to say often, and I love to say this a lot, is don't wait for certainty, provide clarity, right? So as long as leaders are saying, hey, I don't know fully what's coming, what's happening, what is to come, but I'm aware of changes that will be coming, and I'm in the moment, present in the trenches with everyone, that's better than saying nothing until you have full information, every I dotted and every T crossed. So again, I know Kathy's asking a different question, but I think that's maybe how I'll frame that in my response.
It feels like there's no space anymore. There's no quietness. Something will always fill that gap, and it's better for you to lead the narrative rather than something else, trigger something else, I suppose. So yeah. Good point. Thanks, Kathy, for that question. Good one. Flo, I'm guessing nobody's going to wake up in the morning thinking, oh, today I'm going to influence everyone in completely the wrong direction. But it seems to happen. So when influence does go kind of the wrong way, what actually kind of happens next?
I love that phrase around influence walking in the right direction, because when I think about influence, I think of it both as a direction and a velocity issue. And I think as leaders think about this, it's about, are you creating the right movement? And are you creating the right movement in the right direction? And also, movement, the right direction, and does it accelerate? And that's how I'll look at influence. Again, leaders, when they think about this and they think about what they're doing, should be mindful of, you can get attention, but you can lose the trust that goes with that. You can get a reaction, but you can also damage your credibility. And you can persuade one group while you alienate 3 others. And I think this is where, if you ask me, fundamentally influence is a judgment question. right? It's not a communication question. And Tamara, you might disagree with me because I know you are a communication expert at Conferry, but I think beneath the surface is a judgment play. And to the point that Darren, you're asking, this is how I'll frame these questions. I would say, as a leader, it's no longer about influencing a decision. It's about asking, should you? What's the outcome, and in whose interest? So think about it in 3 different lenses. Should I respond? Should I speak? Should I communicate? Yes, you should, because of course we've talked about, what happens when there's nothing stated. There's a tendency for nature and tendency for others to fill the space. But think about should I, then think about what's the outcome, and then think about the interest. Right, and interest really speaks to that whole stakeholder management component, and I think that really is how I would think about influence to prevent this going in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Oh, float. And actually, I agree with you that influence is not strictly about communication. I think communication is a piece of it, and it's also too. You're never done, right? Influence is a full-time job, and it's when it's kind of for life, so to speak, right? Because the situations and people's sort of mindsets and where they are at any given moment, it is constantly in flux. So it's very fluid. And, so someone that might agree with a decision today may disagree tomorrow. So you as leaders constantly are like influencers in chief. And it's one of those jobs you don't really get a day off from. And it is in perpetuity, kind of a full-time profession.
I think we've got another question. So another question from our guests. So, how much of effective influence can actually be learned versus being rooted in a leader's underlying character and interpersonal style? Who wants to take that one on?
Oh.
That's a good one. How much of effective influence can actually be learned? Okay, so I would say I'm a big fan of learning, and so I would say there's a lot that can be learned by everyone. I will also call out, I've seen leaders who are extremely charismatic, who just wing it as they go. And so I've seen how sometimes they've fallen short in terms of their stated objective. So here's my call out. My call out will be adequate preparation, adequate learning around your styles in terms of how you communicate. But I think more so also getting a feedback loop of how your messaging and your insight and your communication is landing. And I think this is where people struggle, because leaders continue to grow in their career and grow in their leadership. You put people around you who would inevitably want to please you. And so that's the call out and the watch out. You've got to have people within the organization who can tell you when what you stated or what you shared is not landing, or what the grapevine or the gossip site or what others are saying off the record, to ensure that you calibrate your influence and make sure that it's effective. So long-winded way to answer that question, but I think actually I lean towards learning versus just leaning on your natural tendencies.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. It absolutely can be learned. I coach leaders on this, right? And so I have to believe that. But I think it does, as you said, it absolutely comes more natural to some people.
Yeah.
But it is like any skill. It can be learned. I would say, and to the point that this aligns with what you were saying around feedback, and it's you as a leader, you can learn to be influential if you want to learn and be coached and to take and will take and act on feedback. That is the number one thing I've found that makes all the difference in terms of, can a leader learn to be influential? Is are they properly motivated, and do they want to learn and grow?
Yeah, totally. I think we've got some poll results. I can see some results here. It might be worth me just saying, rather than, because it seems to be that there's a lot of people in the poll saying all of the above was one of the most popular ones, which is understandable. But it feels genuine, seems to be coming out on top. Is that something you'd expect, or would you expect one of the others to maybe lead the way?
I think that doesn't surprise me at all. I think, in fact, that's how I would answer it. All of these things matter, but if you think about if a message or person it feels inauthentic, you can't always put your finger on why. Yeah. It is a feeling, And we humans are driven, in large part by emotion. And if something, even if it comes at the right, it's clear to understand, it's an unambiguous message, it is highly relevant, but it just sounds like, a leader is reading a script, or their heart isn't into it, or of course they don't believe what they're saying. It is patently obvious to other people on the other side. And it's a really uncomfortable feeling for everyone involved, and it really destroys credibility. I'm not surprised at all.
Okay, cool. Tamra, we talked a lot about what can go wrong. So if we just flip the script for a minute, what makes communication feel genuinely, you've just highlighted something there actually, credible rather than calculated? Do you want to go into that a little bit more detail? But you have touched on that.
So something I've observed is often leaders really want to make sure they come across as credible, right? Highly polished, and really sort of have that gravitas that's so important. And I think the key is it's making sure not to over-index on that and go into the land of being scripted, being almost too slick to believe, right? We know in sort of this creator economy, everyone has the ability to sort of broadcast their views, and there's almost become this preference for more authentic, real, slightly less professional feeling communications. And I think there's actually something for leaders to learn from that. It doesn't mean that you should, show up looking completely unprepared, not at all. But there is this element of humanity that so often leaders can almost bypass or forget, because they're over indexing on making sure they come across as really knowing their stuff. But at the end of the day, if you sound overly scripted, if you are actually, in fact, reading from a script, even if the script's in your head, it still is obvious to people, right? And it is something that I always encourage leaders, be just 1% less perfect. Like, it's okay to be a human being, because guess what? You are.
You're spot on. Let me just add to that piece, Tamara. I think what you're saying, which I'm hearing loud and clear, is something I've actually experienced personally myself. Is much earlier when with Copilot, with AI tools, I am an avid user of those tools, love them very much so. But I to a certain point, I think in many instances, or a few instances, I actually abdicated my role and my style to the tools. And I recall one time, it was about a year or so ago, I'd sent a note out to my team, and one of my team members asked to have a quick chat with me, and said, "You know what? I loved how you used to write before. I love your style. Now it feels like it's so mechanical and so scripted." And I think the message I gleaned from that was, you can use the tools, make it polished, but don't lose the essence. And I think now we've progressed in our use of the tools, where we can actually provide global prompts and ways of actually working with that tools to make sure the language is consistent with how we want to show up. But I think the point you're making is, be human, especially in the world that has gone so far into leveraging AI. That will stand you in a different category than others who use the tool.
Don't lose your voice.
Don't do it.
Be individual, be unique. Flo, I just want to make sure we include something practical, really practical. For everyone watching, what's one thing they could start doing differently tomorrow that would help them build kind of trust every time they show up, I guess?
I love that question. And I'll try to be very practical here. This is for everyone who's thinking about an email, who's thinking about an announcement, a podcast, a town hall. I'll ask you to think about these three distinct questions. What am I asking people to believe? Be very clear about the belief beneath the message. Is it change? Is it pain? Is it loss? Is it trade-off? Whatever that core belief is, ask yourself, what is it I want them to believe? That's one. Then what are you asking them to do? What actions are you trying to create? And then three, what are they observing from you? Because I think that's so important. Your behavior, your decisions, your language, your actions, all of those reinforces really what you say. Now, the last one is actually, for me, the most important, because I think that's where leadership influence is won or lost. Don't say what you wouldn't do. And Tamara, you said it earlier, right? People will see you, people will follow your actions and your behavior. People would actually see you more than they hear you, right? So again, those are the three things I would say: be thoughtful, be mindful, ask the right questions, ask them to do the right thing, and make sure that there's congruency between what you're saying and what you're doing.
I love that. I love that idea of the congruence being so important. I will add, and this is one that is deeply uncomfortable, but I work with leaders all the time and I tell them it's so important. Watch yourself.
Yeah.
You know, if you've just presented at a board meeting or with investors and it was recorded, as painful as it is, watch yourself after the fact, and listen to yourself and notice where there are moments where perhaps you're missing that, congruity, right? Between sort of maybe your body language or your previous actions and the words that you're saying. And you will be shocked at how much that will do for your self-awareness and your ability to show up and really influence effectively going forward.
Love it. Yeah, that's a great way to end. But before we end, I want to finish with my quick fire round. Now, I'm going to give you two choices. You get to pick one, just one, no explanations. No, it depends. I know it will depend. I know. I'm going to force you to just choose one. Flo, I'm going to start with you, then Tamara will alternate. So be ready. So here we go. Flo, data or a great story?
Great story.
Tamara, be liked or be respected?
Be respected.
Flo, prepared or spontaneous?
Prepared.
Tamara, say more or say less?
Say more.
Flo, authenticity or polish?
Oh, authenticity.
Tamara, the message or the moment?
The moment.
Flo, head or heart?
Heart.
Tamara, speak or listen?
Listen.
Thank you. I know you were squirming, wanting to say, yeah, but there wasn't a little. So we have run out of time. Flo, Tamara, thank you both. You've been absolutely amazing. It's been great having you. And yeah, I'm going to have to say goodbye, I'm afraid. Until next time, see you later.
Right.
And before we go, I just want to leave you with one thought. We spent the last half hour talking about how to influence people. But maybe the irony is the harder you try to look influential, the less influential you become. People are pretty good at knowing when you're being influenced. So perhaps the question isn't how do I get people to listen to me? Maybe it's simply, have I given them a reason to trust me? Have a little think about that. And if you want to explore this a little further, take a look at the full Briefings cover story Influenced. We've dropped that link in the chat, hopefully. But that is it from me. Thanks so much for joining us today. Until next time, goodbye.